afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Everybody enjoy lunch? Well, good. This is just great, guys. I'm so excited you all here. We didn't really know what to anticipate in terms of the response, but you all have kind of making me cry. But it's great to see you all. Thank you all for coming. And the most important thing is that this conference becomes something for you to benefit from. And so we certainly hope that you're going to learn. And we're trying to provide life-changing information. And so something that you will be able to take with you and move about your journey. Higher consciousness, higher thought process about different issues that we're trying to solve in terms of a social justice perspective. When you are born or invited to live in the so-called greatest country in the universe, what causes dreams to become lived nightmares? Why so many people never experience the good life? What I mean by good life is dignified existence and self-fulfillment. Is there fairness and justice in the American way of life when it comes to economics for people of color?
No.
That is what we're going to talk about with our panel today. So our topic, finding justice in an economic system that proclaims financial opportunity for all. So to our panel, Richard Peacock, Rosa, Cleve Tinsley, Twaunette, James T. Jones, and Darrin Johnson. Their bio is in the program, obviously, so you want to read those. So we're going to get started. Because this is going to be, this could be a weekend just talking about this. That's right. Ready, panel?
Absolutely.
One more year, and the age of Obama will come to an end. We experienced that breakthrough moment when a black man was given the keys to all the doors to the White House, including the secret passage. The change we can believe in and the chant of "Yes, we can" was supposed to make the lives of black and other people of color lives better. So what's the status? So your first question or first thing to analyze, how would you describe the current economic condition of people of color, especially blacks in this country? And keep it brief.
Unfortunately, even under our first black president, that unemployment numbers are still higher for people of color. They're still higher for black people, and that includes for college graduates. I experienced that myself. Unfortunately, the numbers still show that we have higher unemployment, and it is certainly not due to lack of education, because the numbers also show increased college graduation rates for people of color. And so the fact that we have so many college graduates, not that college is the only indicator of whether or not you'll be employed, but the fact that we have these increased numbers of college graduates, but we still have high black unemployment, I think is reflective of a systemic problem.
I think one of the hardest pills that black people have had to swallow in the age of Obama is that even though he is a black president and he's charismatic and he's talented in a lot of ways, we are still in a state of stagnation in some cases, and in other cases it has gotten worse. I've read studies and I've heard things on NPR, and I've read things in other mainstream papers that suggest that the wealth that black Americans have accumulated has been wiped out. An entire generation of wealth has been wiped out. Is that because of Obama? Not necessarily, but again, going back to what I said earlier, it did happen while he has been president?
For me, I think it's this question about economic justice and whether or not blacks or persons of color have really progressed. I think there exists a sort of paradox, right? At the same time, between 1995 and say 2013, we have seen everything else holding equal, income, education, and qualifications, black progress as it relates to sort of social access and social mobility. What happens is, a good way to think through this is sort of, sociologists have thought about sociology of wealth and what that means. And they talk about three things that's important, I think, and I brought this book specifically because Oliver Shapiro did a great job of comparing black wealth and white wealth. If we really want to look at racial injustice as it relates to economics, it's important to monitor it by wealth and not necessarily by income, right? Because if you look at the Forbes list, the top income over the last 15 years, a lot of African Americans are on these lists. Michael Jordan, Tiger Woods, Serena Williams. But if you look at the same Forbes list that comes out the year about the top 400 wealthiest persons in the world, rarely any African Americans are on there. And this speaks to not only the ability to create posterity, but how do you sustain this over time? And they give three examples of how this inequality has sort of been perpetuated in our society and what kind of stifles black and brown people. One, they talk about what they call sort of how blacks have sort of been cemented at the bottom of this sort of social stratification system. Since slavery and Jim Crow laws, there's been racialization of policy, which prohibits black from being able to sort of access sort of increased wealth over time. But even if we're talking about capitalism and the structure, there's also been laws that prohibited small black businesses from flourishing. So when combined with all these kind of factors, we see a couple of things. We just compare middle income, not middle class. About $14,000 is the gap between middle class income between blacks and whites, everything else being equal, education, income, and everything else. But if we look at wealth, meaning how much a middle class person, perceptive-wise, like if I have the same education, I'm $25,000 behind the average white person. Now, how this is significant is this. Our ability to really say that we're free in this country, in a free market, relates to our ability to be able to say no to authority structures, right? So if I can go into my office and say no to my job, to my boss, not worrying about how I'm going to survive, that talks about wealth rather than income. My income goes up and down. But wealth is where, I can tell everybody in this room, forget you, and walk away and not worry about how I'm going to live the next day. And so I think wealth is a great way to sort of look at inequality, because without doing so, we miss the boat. Because there are scholars out there now who talk about, it's not about race anymore, it's just about class. But those two things are sort of inseparable, and I'm sure we'll get more into that.
Someone once said that it is the best of times and the worst of times. And when you look at African Americans' economic existence during the quote-unquote age of Obama, it is truly the best of times. We have more money at our disposal than we've ever had in the history of blacks being in America. Yet at the same time, we are giving away more money and not having it circulate within our community at a rate that is in many ways unconscionable. What we're talking about, and as a revolutionary nationalist with some social democratic leanings, it's very difficult to be able to deal with the idea of collectivism, which has basically gotten African Americans through some of the leanest times in our history, within a system that is so predicated upon individualism. How do we balance the idea of collectivism and exist within a capitalistic structure? Because even when we're able to recycle our money and to make a couple black folk, Michael Jordan, Bob Johnson, Oprah Winfrey, rich, not quite wealthy, but rich, what is their responsibility to the larger community? As capitalists, they have nothing. Coming from that arcing tradition of justice, they have every requirement. And unfortunately, within this land that we live, the latter holds no weight when compared with the former.
History guides our future. Knowing that capitalism is the dominant economic system in the world, let's talk a little bit about what made the United States powerful and rich. Let's talk about how slavery and the Jim Crow era contributed to the growth of capitalism in this country. Who would like to start talking about that?
I don't know if African Americans are better off now than they were 50 years ago. The overt racism that we see as far as blatant whites-only signs, that may very well be gone. Yet at the same time, African-American leaders during that period, and yes, I'm calling on that vaunted Big Six, Martin Luther King, Roy Wilkins, and the rest of the gang, who made a very strategic error. In hindsight, it has to be looked at as an error. Whereas they put their tangible chips, meaning black businesses, the black dollar that was in many ways circulating within the community, at stake for an intangible first-class citizenship that was written on law books but was never really applied. Look at where we are now. During the 1960s, we had the vast majority of African-American children being educated by African-American school children, being given a curriculum that was at least in some way based upon their historical experience. And look at today's educational system, where African-American males are in many ways running away from educational, as we put them, opportunities. But in many ways, they've tapped into this reality that the current contemporary educational system, the curriculum that is being offered, has absolutely, positively little to do with them surviving in the short term. It's predicated upon long term. And once again, when we look at the school to prison pipeline that we have going right now, Lord knows that once they get involved with that, once they get even a smudge, they are persona non grata in regards to a mainstream economic system.
I think something else too. Did I jump somebody?
I want to make sure that we are talking about what is slavery and Jim Crow contributing to the growth of capitalism. Let's make sure we address that.
And I feel like that, one of the important things that we need to know, that we need to remember, is that the first, I do believe, remember to be in Chris, I do believe it was the first 12 presidents of the United States were all slave owners. That many of the men that created, our Constitution that said all men are created equal were slaveholders. The people that created this country were slaveholders. Slavery is the very foundation of this country's creation. And to pretend as if that's no longer a part of it, that somehow we got all of that out of it, is unrealistic. We can't expect that to have just been, ended in 1865. That's the end. It doesn't have any effects anymore. No. Obviously, the effects are long-lasting. Psychologically, it can be seen, but more importantly, systemically, it can still be seen. That's why we still have black people, despite the fact that we are, in many ways, yes, and I will admit, we are doing better than, statistically, we might, in many ways, might be doing better than we ever have before. We still have, we still have gigantic problems. We have the school to prison pipeline. We have the prison industrial system. We still have these problems. We have the othering of race. We still have police brutality. We still have these things to deal with that we are still so far from having solid solutions to. So yes, slavery, Jim Crow, it's ingrained in our system. It's
I would like to speak to the indigenous, Native Mexican side of that, because there's definitely parts of this history that exist side by side. For example, it used to be in order to cross the border, like as recently as the 60s, starting from the 1800s, people coming from Mexico to come to America to work literally for the day, whether they were coming to watch children, wash houses, whatever it was they were doing because they were desperate to feed their families, they would have to be washed down with DDT or other harmful chemicals, literally, until one woman in the 60s stood up and said, no, we are not going to tolerate this anymore. We're not going to be stripped naked. And there's just so much history that's lost because we do live in this white supremacist capitalist society that erases these histories, and it's taking great effort of people of color to find these voices and find this history and bring it to the forefront so that way it's not forgotten and that we recognize it then and how it affects us now.
The whole modern capitalist system in the U.S. was part and parcel dependent upon slavery for it to sort of flourish. If we think about the three main sort of commoditized products, sugar, rice, and cotton, right? These are the things that this country was founded and built upon. The whole sort of shipping system of the U.S. South, which was the beginnings of the sort of modern period, was indicative of sort of how slavery was so important. But it wasn't just relegated to the South. I mean, the American North, those who were responsible for providing textiles and other products. So slavery had this other impact going on. But it goes beyond that. If you look at education, their trade with England. I mean, if you go to Harvard, you go to Brown, you go to Wright University campus, A lot of the things we see were built on the back of free labor of black and folks of color, right? So if it were not for the fundamentals of slavery, the modern capitalist U.S. society would not have flourished at all. And it, of course, extends over to Jamaica and other realms as well.
Right.
You know, and one of the things, I'd like to ask the audience a question. What is the first U.S. colony? See, everyone says Jamestown, and that is wrong. No, it's Roanoke, also known as the Lost Colony. Roanoke did not make it. And one of the reasons Roanoke was abandoned was that there was no wealth that could be extracted, that they could figure out how to extract.
Yeah.
So Jamestown was in many ways a do-over in the development of the cash crops, sugar, tobacco, allowed and encouraged investors to further dump money and resources into the colonies. And we all know who was out there picking the cotton, the sugar cane, and what have you. So our contribution predates even the formation of this nation. There was not an America when Jamestown was founded. It was the flourishing of Jamestown that allowed other colonies to be created that eventually put the idea, and Americans hate for me to say this, put the idea in the treasonous, backstabbing minds of the American colonists that we don't need the British. They're the ones who broke the deal and they broke away. So you can't separate black labor from white survival on the North American continent. Lo and behold, we should never forget that during those lean moments when Native Americans had tired of white encroachment, there were a lot of people who didn't make it through the winter, investors. The only lifeline that the colonists have, the only way they're able to convince these people to send more resources and more money is that we have these enslaved individuals. They're not slaves. They're enslaved, stolen Africans who are going to extract some wealth for you.
All right, we're gonna move on. So we're gonna go from the past to the present. In this year's presidential campaign, Bernie Sanders dominates the conversation about income inequality, and along with many progressives seem to think this is the disease and racial inequality is a symptom. Fixing unemployment and increasing minimum wage will provide the systemic solution to the race problem. However, racial justice advocates don't agree. Systemic racism must be addressed independently and on its own terms. So the question to the panel, is there a dichotomy between racial justice and economic justice?
There's over 500,000, so they say, homeless in this country. 85% are African Americans, black, people of color. And it's due to addiction or substance abuse. So that's all lies. This is my personal interest because of who I am. And I'm a scholar. On my bio, they forgot to put something. They forgot to put PhD. I'm from the school of hard knocks, so that's where I have my PhD in. However, being once homeless, I didn't know, I found out what a flash drive was in 2009. So, and this is because I was on the streets. I was a crack addict for many, many years. So when I started learning about who I am when I came out of my addiction, I'm trying to read, I'm trying to learn, and I see the racial injustice. I see it when I was attending my GED classes, because guess who was sitting there? We were. And it was a brother that was teaching us at a homeless agency that there was no, you're gonna get this reward if you come and sit in this class. This man was turning out the highest rate of GED graduates that we had to go to University of Houston and take these exams. They shut that program down. You getting these niggas too educated. You gotta stop that. So they shut the program down. The whole system is designed for us to stay at a level to where there will continue to always be racial injustice. They don't want things to be equal. It's not set up like that. It's not designed like that. I've done all this extensive research, even in Houston and nationally, going online nationally, but just in Houston, you know, they just had the homeless count, right? They just had the homeless count here in Houston. Anybody know about that? Okay, so they just did the homeless count. So on the data for, you go and do surveys when you're talking to a homeless individual. Now, mind you, with the separation of races, you know, I'm still want to try to find my nationality and get out the box, as your daughter said earlier. There was no box to check there for African American. But guess who we mostly interviewed and surveyed was African American, blacks, people of color. You know, that was on there. Am I off topic? Kind of am I? Because you know, I will get off and go right over here and I'm supposed to be over. But it's just how this system was designed. There was no person that helped design the system me. It was all white people that designed it.
Well, I think you're giving us a good idea in
Yeah,
terms
so
of perspective in terms of racial injustice.
Right, and that's.
You know, that type of thing.
Well,
So-
I'm glad you can keep up with me.
Yeah, so what we're needing is to see, is there really some distinction between the two, between the racial injustice and economic injustice?
It's,
Out of all the questions you submit, this is one that really make it home to me because my partner and I live in Third Ward area, those of you here in Houston, and of course, there's a large redevelopment going on in Third Ward. And we stay in an interesting area, right? There's a condo for $400,000 across from us, $1,500 rent. But we stay in an apartment complex that's connected to another one where mostly African Americans stay in my complex. Right behind us is mostly Latino ones, right? And it's interesting because they have contracts with these sort of towing companies, right? And it's interesting how it works. Over on the other side, the white side, right, you can park on the curb, park in there, it doesn't matter, no one's gonna come tow you. But these contractors with our apartment complex and the other ones, systematically throughout the day, come through the night intentionally trying to catch somebody who may park for 3 minutes and tow them, right? Now, my partner and I experienced this
I
personally
just
because...
had my car towed yesterday.
I know, right?
Green's Point.
But what happens is there's a reason why they target these two communities in specific, right? Because one, they know if they tow us, we probably can't get it out right away. We don't have $300 to get it out right away.
Right.
So they're gonna make more money in the capital system because they're gonna go. More than often not, sometimes they'll be repossessed because they just don't have the money to get it in time. And after 5 days, there's no guarantee you're gonna be at the same lot. So they move your stuff somewhere else. So there's a direct link to sort of economic justice and racial injustice because the truth of the matter is the white folk ain't getting their stuff towed. In fact, they can leave it wherever.
Yeah.
But this economics is connected directly to how sort of policies and also corporations and smaller companies begin to enact policies to make sure that this inequality is continuing to be spread.
Reason why we cannot separate racial equality from economic equality is simply the facts, the statistics. We just had Third Bank, large bank, they were sued for denying disproportionately to the black community housing. They were sued for that successfully. We have redlining, which keeps black people, even when their earning power increases, it keeps them in, specific neighborhoods. It keeps them in, ghettos, if you want to put it that way. And so our social mobility, in fact, the social mobility of people of color, it's not just black people, it's people of color. The social mobility it's much more limited than for those of whites. I have been told over and over again in my life, when talking about ghettos, why don't black people just move out? Why don't they just move out of the ghetto? If they hate it so much, but so bad there, why don't they just move out? Not realizing that it's, not that simple. For some people, they can just get up and go, but for us, especially when you have grown up in poverty, that was never an option. And it's not like my dad didn't work. It's not like we just didn't have that option. We had to move within, poorer neighborhoods, and that's the reality for many people of color in this country. To separate them is to ignore the reality of what has happened and who is being affected.
And also, some people argue that the charter school system is a way in which people can be discriminated against on both race and class. Because it allows individuals to create on the surface what are public schools, but they're privately run, so they don't have to follow all the rules of regular public schools, and so they can therefore discriminate against black people not by race, but by zip code. And the zip code is indicative of race and socioeconomics. So that is another way of how you can argue that class and race are linked, but it's done much more in a sophisticated way. They don't use race explicitly, they use the zip code.
It's segmented to what we're going to talk about next, and that is wealth disparity and that type of thing. So it's no secret that the rich is getting richer. The middle class is dwindling, which means that the poor is increasing. According to the 2014 U.S. Census, 14.5%, or that's over 45 million people, live in poverty. That's up from 11.3% just in 2000. On the other end of the spectrum, there was a report last week that the 62 richest billionaires own as much wealth as the poor half of the world's population. I was sitting with some friends at lunch talking about this, and they shared that with me. And that was probably the most depressing piece of information I've heard in a long time. 62. That is 6-2. Not 6,200. 62 of the richest billionaires own that much wealth.
Yeah, great.
Okay, so in terms of really trying to understand this and how to create these, take away this inequality, I know it's a lot of stuff that have to take place, but there are some things that we can consider. So I want the panel to consider it from this perspective. So to attempt to solve the issues of income inequality and wealth disparity, state your case for or against minimum wage increase, universal health care, and free public college education.
One thing that a number of other people have been advocating for is that the United States should look at, pay more attention to the Scandinavian countries, because they don't have, they have problems, but they don't have problems like we have problems. And what I mean by that is that the average Scandinavian resident, so when I say Scandinavian, I'm talking about Denmark, Finland, Sweden. People know what Scandinavia is? Okay, cool. I don't know, but based on what I've read and studied, the average...
Give them a geography lesson.
Well, I just want to... The average Scandinavian resident has a better quality of life than the average American. Although there are more Americans who are richer, we have more billionaires, but if you look at the average resident over there versus the average resident over here, it's like this. So what that suggests to me is that we can learn from them. Now, I've heard people say that that what they have is something that they can do because they are geographically smaller and they have fewer people. And so I've taken that into consideration, but I think we still have like the human capacity to do what they do, but do it, making an American version of that. And if we look at what they do, and we don't have to do everything that they do, I think we could have something like actual free healthcare, like what they have. We could have free education. What's the other thing that you said? Well, we could have better wages because we have empirical evidence that all those things exist and people do well. We have evidence of that. So my case is, yes, I am for universal health care, the Scandinavian kind. Yes, I am for better wages, the Scandinavian kind. And yes, I'm for public education, Scandinavian kind.
Well, it sounds like we know where you bought a ticket.
See, thinking back to, this whole system exists because of the slavery oppression and suffering of others. Like, we don't even know who made our clothes or picked our food. It's come from somewhere else. It's come at the price of people's lives, people's suffering. So this whole system just needs to be start over. Let's do something different. You can raise the minimum wage all you want, but you have people fearing for their lives, literally losing their lives. I can tell you, I worked for 4 years in the emergency room here in Houston, and one time a mother who did not speak English was undocumented. They were even scared to come. Her daughter was unconscious. She wasn't breathing while they were eating at the dinner table. She puts her in my arm. We take her in. We work her up. She has a brain tumor that clearly could have been seen and treated. This was the kind of tumor that you would have seen symptoms for months ahead of time, but she's gone to the point of collapsing into her food, unconscious, not breathing, 14 years old, because the parents are undocumented and scared to seek care. So yeah, we can talk all we want about health care for everyone. Well, what do you mean by that? And how are we going to fix all these systemic problems so that, yes, we can get to the point where, yes, we put a maximum wage on this wealthy greed that's destroying civilization, our environment, our world, children, our people are suffering and dying so that they can have a yacht and $1 zillion clothing. Whatever it is. We can talk all day about people having access to health care, but there's so many problems that need to be sorted out, and they seem insurmountable and impossible, but it's important to have conversations like this. I love Dr. Penn. I saw him the other day at the Humanists of Houston. He called social media the great equalizer. Let's continue to use that while we still have the right to. Let's continue to make these spaces and conversations so that we do get to that point where, yes, people don't have to fear for their lives to seek care and risk so much damage and possibly death. Let's get to that point where citizens are seen as human beings and all lives really matter, like they like to say all lives matter. No, they don't. Only certain ones do. You're just saying that to raise the conversation about racial inequality. We have to get to this point where when we do have these things, that they are accessible for everyone.
So my short answer is yes to all of them. I guess I would definitely identify as an anti-capitalist, but my argument would be from a capitalist argument. In the 1950s and 60s, I think the minimum wage rate was sort of half of the minimum worker wage rate to maintain. And to now, if we were to be at today, the minimum wage should be around $12 an hour. Most proponents now just say raise it to $10 an hour. The only argument against that, 25.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
But at a minimum, so that just to kind of continue to function to make people have a livable wage that's necessary. Also, back in the 50s, 60s, a high school education, K through 12, where public education is now, you can live off a high school education and probably make a middle income. Nowadays, it requires at minimum a bachelor's education. I have many friends, and those especially persons of color, who are already saddled with $60,000 worth of debt, right? As it relates to sort of healthcare, you can go to the corner of Rice at Maine and Cambridge and see a whole bunch of folk in hospital beds, and because once they run out of money, they kick them out, and they see them on the cuz right there. And the problem with that is, like other countries have sort of adopted universal health care. Now, what that looks like, I don't know. So I'm just saying the argument here from a capitalist culture is it only makes sense to try to make these things for a person to be successful and achieve well-being in this country.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with Sanders' advancing the idea of universal health care. I mean, come on, we're the richest nation in the world, and people are worried about if they're going to be able to live or not, predicated upon their financial resources. That is morally despicable. And as far as raising the minimum wage, I mean, come on now, not only do we need to raise the minimum wage to probably $30, $35 an hour, but we need to also cap and have a maximum wage that may come in and hover around $50 to $55.
Man, you gonna have us all driving calculators, brother?
I want you to have that.
As long as it's all electric.
This entire discussion reminds me of something that the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once quipped. He said quite simply that the rich could get richer and the poor could be taken care of if the rich would agree to become wealthier and richer at a slower pace, at a slower rate. What we're seeing now is quite simply criminal. You know, it flows against every moral law of the universe. And the thing that makes me shudder, and as I want that Cadillac for you, I want peace for the wealthy and the elite. I don't believe that they're ever going to be able to secure peace as long as they're being governed by this consistent, constant chase for something that isn't even real.
So I went to college for journalism. I have a master's in journalism and studied the media at length. And one of the things that I am seeing as a media critic and media observer, and this is something that's not just relegated to Fox News. We all know that Fox News it's a joke to even call it journalism, really. It's not just Fox News. You can see this on CNN, you can see this on MSNBC, you can see this on the nightly news. Is the demonization of the poor. People that ask for a very, very, very modest $15 minimum wage are demonized. They're moochers. You see the memes all over the internet, and this person flips burgers, and the burger got dirty, and this person wants $15 to do this. You see the demonization of people. You hear people that want universal health care called moochers, and we work hard for our health care. Why should they get it for free? And you have people who actually espouse that education should be paid for. That's the way that we always have done it. We live in a capitalist society. That's the way it's done in capitalism. And that people that ask for this are somehow bad people. That asking for the people that point out the absurdity of the fact that whether or not you stay alive and get proper health care is based on how much money you have. Pointing out how absurd that is somehow makes you evil. We have this, unfortunately, in this country and largely around the world, we have this idea that these people are moochers. We demonize them, we make them look bad, and it is supported, unfortunately, by people who are actually being exploited, the so-called middle class and the poor. We have ourselves demonizing ourselves.
So I'm going to, from the standpoint of the audience, and for those of you that might feel compelled to reveal your politics, you can abstain from this vote, all right? So, from the standpoint of minimum wage increase, how many of y'all support that?
Whose hand didn't go up? There you go.
Right.
Don't be hiding behind all that.
All right, so from the standpoint of universal health care, how many support that? And then free public college education, how many support that?
Both hands.
And how many you vote? How many you vote for Bernie? How many you vote for Bernie? That's the big.
Okay, so we get a gist of the type of audience we have here, right? So we all in here talking about social justice. Sort of a strong relationship, I would think. So next question. Homelessness is the most depressing economic justice issue we face in our society. It just makes me sick. Some cities see it as one of their most intractable problems. Is homelessness preventable? If not, if so? If not, if so?
So everybody looked at me, I saw you.
Let's go. You first, me next.
So homelessness, they will not make it preventable. Have you all, and I'm sure the social workers heard of HMIS. So this is part of the reason why it won't be preventable, because HUD keeps changing the definition of homelessness. One minute it was this, and then I come back from break and it was something else. Now we got to help all the youth, Now first we have to help people with disabilities. No, first it was the veterans. And if you look at how the system is designed here in Houston, it is say the Coalition for the Homeless, Now the Way Home, aka they've ended veteran homelessness. That's bullshit. They have not ended veteran homelessness. They'll say those are the ones that choose to stay on the street. However, they'll put all these credentials and criteria on them and they'll tell you that they don't, but they do. So they won't prevent it. They don't have it designed to prevent homelessness. But the way they have it set up, they don't have social works available to help them life skills. Some of them been on the street so long, they need to start relearn what they need to do to live. And so what happens is they end up back out there. And then these agencies keep receiving all this funding. And it's very disgusting.
I've been homeless 5 times in my life, twice due to domestic violence, and other times for other reasons, including pregnancy, loss of job, all kinds of things. I don't think it's preventable. I mean, you don't see it coming. And, you know, there's so many statistics and stuff that I could name. But could we do something about it eventually? There would have to be a big push for social change to say, hey, this is ridiculous. We have these huge empty buildings that are perfectly suitable for homes, and why can't we let these people live here? Well, because it might inconvenience the rich person that owns it. Whatever the reason, there needs to be a serious conversation and move for change to say we're taking back what's being robbed from us, which is dignity of life. And we're not going to be quiet until something's done.
I don't think that under capitalism there ever will be an end of homelessness. Never. As long as we prioritize monetizing everything, as long as money is the bottom line, we will never get rid of homelessness. We have, as of January 2014, I think it was that the number was 600,000 homeless in the United States. Probably even more than that, most likely more than that by now. And yet we have millions of unoccupied homes. That means that we as a society, the power structures that we have made a conscious decision not to house the homeless. They have said we're not going to do it. There's no money in it, we're not going to do it. That is a conscious decision to have that many unoccupied homes compared to the number of homeless that we have.
There's some capitalists in there about to shoot me.
Tell it.
If the majority of the citizenry recognize capitalism as an inadequate system, can you offer an alternative?
I feel like the few systems that we have in place that might be considered socialist tend to work. I mean, let's look at, for instance, the library system. Sure, it's hurting now thanks to the expanse of the internet, but it's something that has existed and works at a more equal level. You know, being poor doesn't exclude you from going to the library for the most part. Of course, there's library cards and everything like that, but by itself, you don't need money to go to a library. You don't need money to essentially, get mail. It seems like socialist principles tend to work well even in the midst of a capitalist society, hampered by the capitalism, of course. And I don't want to make it clear that I think that socialism is, by itself. I think the answer is, in reality, is something that maybe we have not come up with yet, but I think socialism might be a step in the right direction, is maybe a more accurate way of saying, based on what we have that is socialist and how successful they are.
Okay.
So for me, right, I would agree that capitalism sort of has been oppressive to those who are workers, but it's been more oppressive to those who are not working, right? Who are those who may be disabled, who are outside of the system, because poverty is one of the chief problems, right? So the only answer, I guess, would be speculative at this point, is to talk about ways in which we enable employers or persons to be able to say no and not be a part of the working system and still be able to survive for those who are not able to work. That's theoretical, though. How do we create a system with persons who are not able to work, or those who reject the authority system and able to say no are still able to survive? When we come up with an answer to that, I think we'll get closer to trying to resolve the problems of capitalism.
Okay.
I'm not sure if I'm really offering an alternative to capitalism. I don't believe that within this nation, as far as we've gone with this capitalist monster, that the powers that be would ever relinquish it. So I think that if we're going to have this discussion, we may need to move it into sort of a real world type of situation. And instead of indoctrinating ourselves by saying that the working class and the poor need to start thinking about this thing differently, I think that we need a humongous dose of, number one, love, and number two, reorientation for the wealthy and the elite. Sort of a revamping of Keynesian economics that would explain to them that as long as they are, and of course we would have to address them in a way that is financially advantageous for them, and get them to understand that as long as you are hoarding all of this money and not employing those people who are going to buy your goods, you are lessening your financial profit. that may be the only way to get them to understand, quite simply, that if you give some, you'll get much more back in return. Outside of that, they're not going to even listen to you.
I'd like to offer that a major alternative would be for each one of you all to evaluate what it would do for our economy and our democracy if we had more worker-owned cooperatives. So how many of you all are not familiar with worker-owned cooperatives? So when I'm using that term, it's another language to you. How many of you all are in that category? Worker-owned cooperatives. Worker-owned cooperatives. Okay. So if you're familiar with it, give it some real consideration. And I think you'll see that might be a real alternative to the way our capitalism works.
Yeah, but none of them have ever worked like this.
I differ with you on that. Okay, we're gonna open the floor.
I'm open for example.
There are several in
It
Austin.
actually is working.
In terms of a worker-owned cooperative that works,
The best one that I know of is Mondragon in Spain.
right.
So what is your feeling on the amount of money that we're spending, 51 cents of every dollar, that goes to killing people of color all over the world?
The defense industry has its lobbyists. And so that's why when bills are passed, spending bills are passed, they have enough Democrats as well as Republicans to support them. And another thing that I've heard is that what also helps the defense industry is that you have different sectors of the defense industry all over the country. And so they can go to basically any lawmaker from any state and say, hey, if you don't support this, you're going to lose jobs. So it's an industry that's not concentrated in a particular region. Because you have some lawmakers who are like, well, I'm about corn, they're about cars. So you come to me if you want to talk about corn. But in the case of the fish industry, there's something in every single state related to the defense industry.
So, but my question is then, do you think when Bernie says something about, it's not about just me, it's about us, what we're going to do you think that that's something different, a different direction in terms of the political campaign or the political U.S. Presidential campaign? Is that he's saying we need a political revolution, and it's not just about him, that we need to do it. He's not saying I'm going to do it, but that we're going to do it.
It would be great and new if he actually meant it. We've heard that rhetoric before. So now, if he stays, and I believe that he means that, him staying the course and actually driving through with that would be something that was unprecedented within this national politics over the last several decades.
Okay.
It needs to be made clear. I've said this before. You're not here, but every political season, there is that candidate that is held up by so many people as being the magic bullet and the magic answer that's going to solve all our problems. And this candidate has said something that candidates have never said before, and it's never true. There's always a candidate every election season, every election cycle that says this stuff. What Bernie has said is not stuff. Maybe he has said some unique things, maybe regarding race. But as far as we need to do this, not just but we've heard that rhetoric before. We're not going to get a magic bullet answer from a politician. It's going to take the people.
Right.
We're going to have to end it right here. So let's give our panel a big round of applause. I'm sure we'll have opportunity in the hallways for other questions, conversations. So let's continue to talk about this.